All right. So today I have a great conversation for you today. I am here with Becky Banasik, and Becky is a customer success leader in startups. And as such, one of the biggest jobs she has is to consolidate all the available data on customer experience and clearly communicate that to leadership teams, the board, the rest of the company. And then over multiple companies, Becky has helped identify the most important leading indicators to churn risk. And working alongside other stakeholders in the organization, she ruthlessly prioritizes what the organization needs to do to address the risk. So, hey, thanks for talking to me, Becky.
Absolutely. I appreciate you reaching out. And as somebody who has worked in customer success for quite a few years and over multiple companies, it's a really fun type of job. And when you try to think about employee satisfaction and how it's related and tied to client experience, client success is just right there in the front lines.
So you've worked in client experience management. You've worked in branding as well. Like, tell me about the scope of your career and where it's led you.
Yeah, I talk about this a lot because client success and customer success didn't exist when I started working. And I thought I'd be a psychology professor or maybe a therapist, and landed myself instead in the consulting world. So I spent a few years in management consulting, loved traveling, loved getting to be the person on site with a team, trying to understand what clients need and really get to bring that to bear. And then all of a sudden, we entered this world of software as a service where you had to keep clients. You don't just deliver something to clients and it's done. You have to deliver something in perpetuity. It's a journey. You have to keep them using that software, and found my niche there because there is so much data. There is so much change. And I think it just fit my skill sets. It fit where I could be excited. And I really enjoyed recruiting people to come into client success, whether they stay there or whether they use that as a stepping stone into other roles.
So you talked about churn risk. And for those who know, we know that clients leave, and you sometimes they leave and they tell you why, sometimes they leave and they don't tell you why. But tell me about your ruthless pursuit of data and how other organizations can engage in that.
Absolutely. And a lot of this is going to be about your stage and who your clients are. And so there's not one formula that fits all. But for anybody who does know much about churn, churn is a lagging indicator because you may or may not know that someone's going to leave. And when you're working at a startup, you may not have even hit your first renewal class yet. So how can you hypothesize what you think those are going to be even before you have the data? Because you first lay the groundwork by tracking data and having hypotheses. And then once you actually start to have some of your renewal classes, then you can now take that data and you can correlate back to see, all right, were your hypotheses correct? Are there some things that you didn't expect that were really going to be important? And then once you get the first round going, it starts to get more and more refined over time because it may be different for different segments. It gets very different as macroeconomics come into play. And so you get to fine tune from some of those early hypotheses into, hey, maybe there's some quadrants, or maybe there's some particular industries that weren't a good match. And that's where the fun comes in, because that's where you can take that back to sales, or you can take that back to product. And so client success is just really at that core of how you're working with those clients, how you're gathering that data, and how are you making sure you're taking that to be able to do something about it within a company.
Absolutely. And, I'm a believer that principles of client success, of risk mitigation management can be used across industries. And from that, CX has a very specific language and lingo to it. So to cross industry preface, and trying to figure out what you just said, it's that when a customer leaves, there are indicators that are not as lagging as when they leave. There
Exactly.
are signs. There,
There's
I have a great mentor, Brendan Burchard, and he will say, before the lightning, there was thunder, right? So there was thunder. There was some sort of indicator before they left that they were on their way out the door to your competitor, or they were dissatisfied with your service or what have you. So understanding where the thunder is
exactly.
and what numbers are associated with different, like, we had a really big thunder and lightning storm the other day, actually yesterday,
Yeah, I was going to
so
say
much that the
I'm a little
power
bit
went
north of
out.
you. Yeah, so I got hit a
Exactly.
little after you.
Exactly. So much of the power went out, right? So you have the thunder, you have the lightning, and then the power's out. You know, so
Exactly.
that's kind of like churn risk indication, right?
It's absolutely like churn risk mitigation.
When you look at churn risk mitigation, you have to look at all of the aspects of the customer relationship, right? You're looking at what sales promised them. You're looking at the CSM and the CSM relationship. You're looking at the product. You're looking at value metrics and does first of all, does the company even know its value metrics? But also, if the company does know their value metrics, are they scoring them? Or is there some sort of method of follow-up and receipt of value? So there's all of these touch points, and I love that you bring in the employee experience as well, because that front customer line, it's a main reason for customer churn, that they're not feeling treated right by that
Exactly.
front customer line.
It's interesting that, and I haven't been able to find a good statistic. So this is, I'll agree, anecdotal from one of the private equity firms that I've worked with, that employee NPS is one of those early predictors of client NPS. So maybe you get about a 6-month lag. So if you start to see the employee NPS drop, especially with your client-facing teams, you'll start to see that happen for clients. And some of it is causal, but some of it is, hey, if you're not doing what the client wants and you're putting people in a position where they're uncomfortable with what they're delivering, then you'll see that start to drop in their satisfaction and their comfort with the job. And ultimately that will turn around and create this really unhappy cycle, both for employees and for clients.
And a lot of it comes back to communication, right? It comes back to the ability for that CSM to feel like they can use their voice. And sometimes, especially when it comes to risk mitigation, it can get a bit embarrassing for a CSM if they feel like they can't fix it,
Yes.
because they feel like it's their job to fix it. So, how would you approach something like this in terms of risk mitigation?
I think there's a couple of things that you have to do. There's some layers to it. And one is in coaching client success managers, especially early in their careers. And I've gotten the pleasure of getting to hire people, a lot of people in their first or second job in client success. And I think people that make good client success, early career people, are actually perfectionists, such that you have to actually get them to a point where they're recovered perfectionists. So it is not a one-to-one relationship. Whether you have 10 clients or 120 clients, you can never do every single thing that you want to get done. And if you're in that mindset that you can do everything and fix everything, you're never going to be happy and your clients are never going to be happy. So one thing is saying, what's the right amount? How do you teach somebody that it's okay to let some things go? Or if an email is taking you too long to write, you may be too emotionally enmeshed in it, and it's okay to ask somebody else to help, because people do care, and losing a client can feel very personal for a CSM. And so some of those things can be taken personally in a way in which it bogs down a CSM. So one is really getting people more comfortable with the fact that it's like, hey, this isn't all about you. You're that front line, but you have a lot backing you up to be able to do this. And nobody's asking you to be perfect. Like, people are looking for you to bring the right thing at the right time. And so if you can get people past that, again, I'm thinking very, very minutely right now, and then I'll get into some of the bigger picture. I think one of the biggest things that early CSMs do that upset customers is not give them information along the way. They wait to communicate until they have an answer. And if you wait until you have an answer, you've left a client thinking that something's wrong or you're ignoring them. And so getting people over the fact that it's okay to do interim communications to say, hey, here's the way I can tell you that these are steps I'm taking towards this. These are the teams that I'm going to work with. Here's an expected time frame. I'm going to get back to you. If I don't hear back by then, I'll let you know and give you an update on that as well. So in those moments of mitigation, or in those moments where somebody could freeze up, if you give them that tool and those tools and that permission, then they'll get much more comfortable with it. And I think when you do those types of things, then that person who's on the other side really is going to feel like you're in it together. And, even when you look at those risk mitigation factors, I think maybe, early days, people might have thought, hey, if you've got a lot of service tickets, a service ticket means somebody is unhappy, but actually it's mostly the opposite, right? It's actually a sign of engagement. If somebody cares enough that they're either making a suggestion, they're trying to fix something, they're trying to understand something more, then that's actually a really good sign to their level of engagement. And so part of that can also be, how do you teach somebody then in those moments? Are you just going to fix something? Are you going to fix and teach them something so that they don't have that problem again? But if you just go by your instinct to be like, oh, I need to rush and do something, you may not actually optimally give them what they need. And you may not teach them in a way that is actually going to make them happy in the future.
What I've heard here is there are three voices that really matter in this. There is the environment that the organization sets up to make it okay to say, hey, something's not right. There's the voice of the employee to drop the perfectionism, drop the need to know, and feel comfortable issuing a holding statement and maintaining communication, even in the face of not knowing, upset client, any of those things, not shutting down the voice. And then the other one is the voice of the customer, right? Not making wrong the voice of the customer, and understanding that every support ticket is an opportunity to engage that customer for their ideas, engage that customer for their instructional needs, and engage that customer to spark up any incidents that might have happened that the organization can learn from. And I think when you have this trifecta of disclosure, where you have a speaking organization and a speaking employee and a speaking client, you have this kind of fence away from the risk of churn, because this customer feels heard. They feel supported by the CSM. The CSM feels supported by the organization. The customer feels supported by the organization. And now you've got this lock of communication that doesn't necessarily feel more comfortable to say, I'm going to roll the dice with another company and see if they treat me better.
Exactly. And again, people want to work with people. And I feel like in my experience, it's that the client success piece is expected. And so if you are not providing that, that level of service, or whatever level of service feels right for that particular product, the game is off. But if, as long as you're providing that and creating that communication, that churn percentage that's about that individual starts being really small. And then what you can focus less on is the people, and focus on what are the big threads that I can do as a company that are going to make a big difference. So what are the product improvements? So what are the things that CSMs are having to do themselves that can be productized? And we know that they're valuable because they've done them and clients have told them they're valuable. How do I now take that and make that part of a productized offering, whether it's something free, whether it's a paid offering? Those are big opportunities to be able to take back to the rest of the team. So again, once you get that first layer of communication done, now you get to move on to bigger and better things that you're working on and having an impact.
Absolutely. And from these ideas comes innovation. I love how you touched on that, Becky. It's that, seeing these moments of voice from your customer and the voice of the customer, which is a big movement right now, understanding voice of the customer. And I believe there can be a lot of validity to voice of the customer. I think there can also be a lot of platitude toward
Right.
voice of the customer. So it is really up to that chief customer officer level, that higher strategic level, to bake voice of the customer into the customer journey and
Absolutely.
bake it into the customer journey as much as you bake the risk mitigation into the customer journey. Also understand that there are innovation opportunities. There are opportunities to be proactive in CS versus reactive in CS, and use it as that opportunity. But in order to enable voice of the customer, you must enable voice of the employee. I do not think the two are mutually exclusive. What do you think?
Yeah, there's no possible way to do that. Even if you're going to do something that's AI driven, it still starts from a knowledge of the customer. You can't just do that first. There's still a step before you can start to mechanize some of that. And so absolutely, if that CSM doesn't feel empowered, like I am my own entrepreneur of my book of business, and I have some leverage and ability to make decisions about that. I am the expert about that, then you're not going to get anywhere. But I think if you empower that CSM to know that they have some ability to do that, then what you have to do is teach them not to act on the anecdote. Is to me that like topper, right? So I think that the rest of the organization typically isn't going to act on anecdote. And so how do you bring up anecdotes, but then turn it into data? And that's where I think that leadership in that chief client officer can come in. So whether it's that individual is raising, hey, I think there's an issue, can we quantify it? Or they're saying, I'm spending a lot of time doing this. And if you start to get people thinking about that data and quantifying and understand where the company is, you can also quell some of that discomfort that a CSM may have. All right, you're doing this manually right now because we're making a conscious choice. Our team is doing it for this many hours. Doing it in product may fit here, and that's when we're going to get to it. So some of your things, your data line's going to rise up enough that that's going to get ruthlessly prioritized, or some of it may have to be on the back bench and you may still have to do some of that manual work, or you may have to do some of these things until it rises to that level to, from a data perspective, against some of the competing needs, whether it's product, whether it's hiring, whatever you're looking at. If you're not taking these anecdotes and turning them into data, you're not going to influence the rest of the company with that voice of the customer.
Exactly. And just to put a framework around it, acting on anecdote is, we can get very, very tied to our books of business and our relationships. And acting on anecdote is having one person bring up an issue, a concern, and it's almost like Chicken Little, the sky is falling, right? Something falls off the shed, knocks you on the head. You really think it came from the sky, and it's the entire sky that is falling. And you can capture that something fell, but unless you have multiple things that are falling, perhaps it doesn't make sense to declare that the full sky is falling. And that's what acting on anecdote is it's that moment where something happens and it feels really big at the time. It feels like a really big thing that just happened, but is it? And if you're not capturing these instances and you're not looking at the whole picture, you might not see how the incident plays into the whole picture. And you may not see maybe the nuances to the incident as well. Perhaps it's user error and the
Right.
sky isn't falling and it's not a organizational failure. So this is where data comes in and why it's so important not to take potential outliers in data and call them the rule, to really look for themes that are going on in the data. So how can organizations accomplish this?
So, I mean, one is, and it's, the ideal is saying, hey, we are going to get everything into one place. Like whether that's, hey, I'm getting this into a Tableau Looker kind of situation so that I can see everything at once. Maybe it's your client success software. I will admit, I still think that this is a gap or an area within client success that we can make a lot of improvements. I think more so than most departments within a company, client success ends up being the ones stuck in the most silos of data and stuck in the most tools, because their touch points are all of the company. They're receiving things from sales or maybe kicking leads back to sales. They need to know what's happening in product, and they may be the ones to catch bugs or things in product or report them back from clients. And all of these may be in different places. The better you can start to pull all of that data together in a meaningful way. And so I was like, at a snap, you can basically say, okay, if this client has this issue, and I can show this client has this issue, can I speak to what impact that has from a revenue standpoint? Can I speak to whether that's just in one industry? Can I speak to how close are customers who are experiencing this to their renewal? And that goes back to that prioritization piece, because again, you can't do everything at once. You're going to identify a lot of things that can be improved or need to happen or that are opportunities. And maybe finishing that new product launch is still more important than fixing one thing that you can teach people to work around for a small period of time. But if you're not informing that CSM and you're not putting them in their position in which they can inform the client and feel like they're working together with that, of saying, hey, right now, this is coming after this new release that's going to improve your business in this way, and it's going to make it better for you. So please stick with us while you have to do this workaround, and I'm happy to help you in whatever way I can. Then again, you're now making 2 out of the 3 of the group in the framework that we were talking about earlier, not in the know, not comfortable with what's happening, and feeling like they're not being heard.
And I think this is a really great point that you bring up, Becky, because on the day to day, all of this can get really overwhelming because there's so many places where data is, so many different systems where data resides, and pulling that all together. And I think that's one of the benefits to getting some third-party help and going, hey, you are totally objective on this.
Yes.
You're not connected to the CSMs in the front line. You're not connected to our customers. You're not even connected to me or indebted to me at the executive level. So here's some data. Here's the secondary data. Here's maybe some things that we want to know. And if you need to collect some primary internal data for validation or conduct some interviews, go for it. Compile this, and let's see what we need to ruthlessly go after and understand this, because it's a lot. It really is a lot to ask.
It's a lot to ask. And it's a lot to ask of somebody who, again, in their day-to-day, especially if there's a big bug, right? If something gets released and it doesn't go smoothly, you've now put a CSM in a position where I think if you go back to psychology, maybe you need 7 positive interactions yourself to overcome even one difficult conversation that you've had to have with a client. So if you have now put a CSM in a position where a half or even a third of their conversations are heavy apology or collecting what's going wrong, then again, you've created
biased your data.
Yeah, you go back to the data, but you if you're not doing those things, again, you're putting the people who are trying to use your product, which is client success and your client, in a position where they can't do that and where they are uncomfortable. It's difficult, and again, that increases the risk, and that's one of the hardest things to measure, is saying, it's like, well, we just didn't do things fast enough that people asked us to do.
Yeah. And also, just I gotta blurt it out there, but it's also true that you've biased your data. So if you're always collecting what is going wrong, that is all you will see.
Yes.
And if you are not also collecting the points where you have moments of value,
Right.
if you first of all don't know those value metrics, if you're not collecting those moments of value, if you're not understanding how that interacts with the customer issues, you actually don't see that scale. You don't see that balance between what's kind of not going. It's like the marble jar, when you put it in marble for every time something goes wrong, and then enough it goes spills the marbles. But if you don't move over to the positive side, you're going to just be constantly spilling the customer's marbles. and
Right.
and when you do that with data, you're not getting the true sentiment. You have a negativity bias, which might actually trip churn risk indicators too soon, causing reaction and reactivity versus the proactive that could be put into place based off of, oh, we see that when issues are escalated with this customer within 2 asks,
Yes.
that they are actually very happy with us. And there is no churn risk with this customer because they understand that they're well cared for and that is captured. But if all you capture is they're constantly needing to escalate,
Yes.
now they look like a problem client. So it's all about how you tell that data story. And I think too, that's how getting a little bit of distance from it, having that third party view, having that less emotionally invested third party view is really important to tell that entire story.
And again, I think especially when you love all the founders that I've worked with, but especially when a lot of your leadership team is founders, some of that coming from the third party rather than coming up from CSMs can actually help quite a bit to create that voice and to do that.
I think you just hit the nail on the head. When you're working with founders, you're working with highly passionate individuals who have created a solution. And especially for those who are in mergers and acquisitions and they're acquiring those companies, there is a data risk around that going, oh, well, how were the founders having this data collected? Is this really the boots on the ground situation, or perhaps could there be some founder bias
Yes.
in
And
this
bias,
acquisition?
some blind spots. I mean, I think that the blind spots from a founder's perspective can really be a thing, and their openness to that I think is huge in terms of really making sure that that voice of the customer is heard.
Thank you so much for such an amazing conversation. Man, Becky Banasik, you are just amazing. Um, just the final takeaway on this is what for you? What would you say if you could leave people with one takeaway? What would that be?
I would say the best advice that someone gave me is have a lot of hypotheses, prove them wrong fast. 80% of the things that you think are going to be risks are not going to be risks. So how quickly can you get the data, test it, and know it's wrong? So you find those 20% that either may be the things that you expect, or some part of that is going to be something you didn't expect. And so how fast can you have hypotheses and act on them? And then how are you constantly refreshing that? So you may have a data story, but data in and of itself, without trying to say what you're going to look for, is not going to get you anywhere.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate you reaching out so we could have this conversation.